We're going to play a numbers game, starting with 85%. Any guesses what this number means? 85%. Any guesses what this number means? If you've got a guess, pop it in the chat box. But before I tell you what that 85% is, okay, we've got some pros in here. Before I tell you what that 85% is, let me tell you about this number, 45%. So lately, it feels like we're spending more of our time working than ever before. In fact, since the pandemic sent us home in early 2020, 45% of professionals say that they regularly work more hours during the week than they did before the pandemic. Is that you? I would love to know, like, yes or no in the chat box. Do you feel like you're working more hours during the week than you did before the pandemic? And so that's not going to be everybody. It's 45%. Not really the case for Edna, but that is the case for Michelle, for example. So according to FlexJobs, 65% of the remote workers that they surveyed reported working more hours. So this is more hours anytime during the week, weekends, just more hours than they had worked before they went remote. So we're seeing a trend. We're spending more time working, and 70% of professionals who transitioned to remote work because of the pandemic say that they now work weekends. Anybody else feeling like they're working more on the weekends now? And by the way, Autumn, I mean, same thing. Sometimes it just happens. There's just more that seems to be happening that is requiring us to be behind our computers. And out of curiosity, you know, where's everybody from? So I'm coming to you from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I live in Baton Rouge, about an hour away from New Orleans. I'm a member of a pretty remote team. So I'm talking with my colleagues that are all over the country, like on a regular basis. So we're dealing with different time zones. We're dealing with different, you know, parts of the country, and it can definitely be a lot. And so, yeah, you know exactly what that's like, Autumn. And so, like, as a result of this shift to remote, flexible, and hybrid work environments, studies have found that our time in meetings has doubled in the past year, and it just continues to climb. So because collaboration looks completely different, you know, chats at the water cooler replaced with scheduled Zoom meetings at what feels like all hours of the day, meetings are getting longer too. So with more meetings and longer meetings, it should come as no surprise that the average employee spends 85% of their work in meetings. So anybody who said 85% is the amount of time each work week that people are spending in meetings. So, okay, let's say that you're working a 40-hour week. Let's say that you're working a 40-hour week, and some of us are working longer than that. But if you're working a 40-hour week, 85% of your week is 34 hours spent in meetings. 34 hours spent talking about the work, planning the work, instead of sometimes doing the work. So does any of that ring true for you? More meetings, longer meetings? And if that's a yes for you, just put the word meetings in the chat box. Meetings, and more meetings. So what do we do about it? How do we get this number down so that we spend a little less time in meetings and a little more time on what matters most? And John, I am very happy to hear that. Like, that's really good that you are one of those who is not spending 85% of their time in meetings. So, well, if you're here, then you are very likely a Clockwise user. So you're already on the right track to optimizing your meetings and getting that focus time. But let's be honest, meetings are just a fact of life. And with many of us working remotely or hybrid, you know, we already said we're on teams with members spread across the country and across the world. we've got to be more intentional with our collaboration than ever before. So how can we collaborate, status update, take care of our teams, and build community while spending less time in meetings? It can kind of feel like an impossible task sometimes, but today we're going to dive into 3 ways to do exactly that, to spend less time in meetings. But first, you might be curious about who I am and how I seem to know so much about meetings. Well, to tell you a little bit about me, and also while I'm telling you about me, I would love to know what you do. Tell me your job title. Are you a manager? Do you lead a team? I would love to know about what you do while I'm telling you about what I do. So I've actually been putting meetings on the calendar for years now. So I actually kicked off my career in the marble halls of Congress as a scheduler to a United States congressman, managing one of the most hectic calendars in the country. We're talking meetings, meetings, and more meetings. I spent what felt like 10 to 12 hours a day rearranging appointments on a calendar and moving meeting requests, speaking invitations, reception details, not to mention things like committee meetings and actually going to vote on bills. But after living in DC, I missed my home state of Louisiana. So I moved back and I kicked off a decade-long career in crisis communications and government affairs. Hurricanes, oil spills, tornadoes, droughts, plant explosions, nonprofit embezzlement schemes, universities on the brink of financial collapse, you name it. And I've probably escorted someone down a freight elevator and into a back alleyway in order to avoid TV cameras waiting outside. It was pretty 24/7, and that kind of 24/7 lifestyle can really take its toll. So I walked away from that kind of prestigious career looking for a better way of life. And after diving into every time management and productivity book under the sun to try and fix my own time management challenges, I decided to become a time management coach and help others create order out of chaos. So now every day, I get to help busy professionals like you stop feeling overwhelmed and start spending time on what matters most as head of community at Clockwise. So you get to consider me your time management coach. And today we're going to work together to clear the decks. And we're going to do that in 3 ways. First, we're going to cut unnecessary meetings. Then we're going to consider asynchronous communication. And finally, we're going to craft shorter or less frequent meetings. How does that sound? Does that sound like something that would be exciting to talk about today? Clearing the decks and getting our time back. But we can't do any of those 3 things effectively without taking this important first step. And that's conducting a meeting audit. Okay, question. If you've ever done an audit of your meetings, put a 1 in the chat box. And if you've never done an audit of your meetings, put a 2 in the chat box. I would love to see. Okay, this is going to be fun. You're going to love this. This is so eye-opening. Oh, Michelle has. Okay, I can't wait to hear if this is similar to your experience auditing your meetings before. So a meeting audit is exactly what it sounds like. It's doing a sweep or an assessment of your meeting landscape and understanding where your time in meetings is going. Not just how much of your time is going to meetings, but where your time is really going. So how does a meeting audit help you spend less time in meetings? Well, it re-engages you with the purpose of your meetings. Sometimes without realizing it, time will pass and you'll continue to attend a meeting week in and week out, but it's not really adding value to your work, or maybe you're not really adding value to the meeting. You're just kind of there out of habit. And maybe you're spending most of that meeting checking Slack or writing emails or working on something else in the background. I mean, Let me know if you've ever been guilty of doing that. Put the word guilty in the chat box. Trust me, you are not alone. We've all been there. Doing a meeting audit also helps you decide whether or not your current meeting commitments are truly worth your time. Yep, John and Michelle, hey, you're not alone. Been there. We've all been in a meeting like that we're just completely not there. So conducting a meeting audit doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be scary, but it does have the potential to change everything. So how do we do a meeting audit? I've got a step-by-step for you. So if you've got something to take notes with, you're going to want to get this down. So the step-by-step. First, I encourage you to start by choosing maybe 1 or 2 typical weeks on your calendar. And so I know that there is truly no such thing as a typical week. Every week's going to be different. There's always going to be something that happens that's out of the ordinary, but do your best. I like to look back on the past few weeks to get sort of a recent representative sample. It doesn't really make sense to pull a typical week from 3 months ago if a lot has changed since then. So step 1 is to choose 1 to 2 typical weeks on your calendar. Then, if you can, print out that week, like print out a full week's view, or if you can save it as a PDF and mark it up, maybe you've got like an Apple Pencil or something like that you can mark it up. That would work really well too. And step 3 is to go through and look at each one of your meetings and give it a rating. So we're really going to categorize these meetings. We're going to give it a rating of 1 to 5 in order of importance. 1 being most important and 5 being the least important. All right. So here's how you can think about your meetings as you're rating them. So a 1 would go to a meeting that you would consider mission critical. These are those meetings that you absolutely have to attend and you have very little control over. So an example would be an all-staff meeting. Maybe every single Monday, there's an all-staff kickoff meeting and everyone is expected to be there. And then maybe on Fridays, you've got a weekly wrap-up meeting and everyone is expected to be there. You don't have control over when this meeting is and you've got to be there and it's mission critical. So that's an example of a number 1 meeting. A 2 would go to the type of meeting that you need to attend to do your job, and this cannot be delegated. You need to attend it, but it cannot be delegated. So one-on-ones with your team are a really great example of this. So if you are managing a team and it's important for you to, as a manager, check in with different members of your team to gauge, a status update on projects, to understand where they are, to support them as a team member, this is a great example of a number 2 meeting. You can't delegate your one-on-ones. You've got to be the one doing them. A 3 would go to meetings that are important, but they could potentially be delegated if you had enough lead time or if you could train someone else to attend the meeting on your behalf, or maybe someone who could take notes to share them with you. So examples could include cross-functional team meetings. So maybe you're on the marketing team and you've been attending, a sales team meeting just to stay abreast of what they've been working on. Could you have someone else on your team attend? Could you look at the notes after? So those are just some examples of like what a number 3 meeting might be. Other examples could include, an ad hoc project meeting. Instead of you being in the meeting, a member of your team could be in the meeting. Or meetings with an external partner, like say a PR team. Maybe you don't need to be the person to be in that meeting, but someone else on your team could be empowered to be in that meeting for you. So a 4, a meeting that you would give a 4 to, these are the meetings that are nice to have, but they're not totally necessary. So some examples here would be a cross-functional one-on-one, or maybe even a weekly Q&A session with your team. Like, let's say you already have a weekly kickoff with your team on Mondays, but you've been doing this Thursday check-in. That sometimes it's productive, sometimes it's not. It's nice to have, but it's not totally necessary. So that's how you can think about the 4. And then meetings that you would give a 5 just don't really have a real impact on your job. So these are meetings that are outside of your direct responsibility that you attend just to be nice. So maybe somebody invited you early on so that you could have visibility on what they were working on, and you've continued to be invited meeting after meeting, even though there's nothing really there for you. And so these are the ones we were talking about a little while ago that you're probably just halfway listening while you're checking Slack, writing emails, or online shopping, or whatever it is that you do whenever you're not paying attention in meetings. We've all been there. Oh, Edna, this is a really great question. Could 4 also be gatherings, such as like team building social events? It is important for me to connect with the team since I will stay remote and some will go back to the office soon. You know, I think that's such a really important case-by-case basis. You know, I would say that if someone was newer to an organization and they know that they will always be remote, they may want to place a higher priority on those team building gatherings in order to build that community, that camaraderie, and start building those relationships that are important for you know, your professional work together. But if you're in a situation where it seems like there's another social type team building gathering every week, then maybe you could deprioritize some of them and be more selective about which ones you participate in. Does that kind of fit? That it just does that kind of make sense? That it really kind of depends. But gatherings, like those team building events, that really that is a good example. It's one of those things where you just kind of have to know what your balance is. If you don't attend enough, might you be seen as not being a team player, especially if that's like a company core value, or if you are attending too many and it's at the expense of your work product, then it's finding what that balance is. But yeah, that would be a good example of a 4. So, and since I know I just threw a lot at you, I just gave you a lot of details, I want to point you over to this blog post over on the Clockwise blog, which captures all 5 of those meeting types, those meeting rating types, plus examples. So you can check that out as well. So you'll have the replay, but you can also reference this blog post in case, as you're doing your meeting audit, you want to revisit those types. All right. Any other questions about the different types of meetings in the rating scale for your meeting audit? All right, so now, as you're doing your calendar audit and you're giving each of your meetings ratings, those 1 to 5 ratings, your wheels are going to start turning. Right? Your wheels are going to start turning as you're looking at each one of those meetings, either on your printout or your PDF that you'll be marking up. And you'll probably find that, you start asking yourself questions like, do I really need to be in this meeting? Or is there someone else who could share the highlights instead? Could my attendance at this meeting maybe be delegated to someone else? You might start thinking about whether you could empower certain members of your team to be in charge of this meeting instead, giving you that focus time back. You might start wondering, okay, is there an assigned note taker, or is there a document archive that you could skim later to see if anything important was covered? You know, all of those questions play into the bigger question of, do I really need to be there? And then you also might be thinking, well, is this meeting really necessary at all? And a couple questions there, has the meeting series served its purpose? Sometimes we'll kick off a series of meetings because we're working toward a specific project or a specific goal. And then even though the project is winding down and we don't necessarily need to be in touch with that team on a regular basis, the meeting still continues because it's just become a habit. Or, you might ask yourself, could this meeting be shorter and less frequent? Could you cut it down from an hour to 30? Could you meet once a week instead of twice a week? And then you might be thinking, okay, could this meeting just be cut and canceled altogether? The thing is that when you're running from meeting to meeting and deadline to deadline, it can be really hard to understand how we're spending our time because we're living it, right? We're in it. We are in the thick of it. But doing that meeting audit really requires you to pause and reconnect with why you're spending so much of your time in meetings. And then once you've done your meeting audit, it's time to take action. And I would love to know, do you see yourself doing a meeting audit after we wrap up? Is that something that you see yourself doing by the end of the year, at least? We're about to step into December. We've got until the end of the year to really get a handle on where our time is going. And just like Autumn said, where our team's time is going. Yeah, that's awesome. And so once you've done your meeting audit, it's time to take action. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut and cancel. We're going to cut and cancel. Anything that's nice to have, but not necessary, we're going to let it go. Anything that's run its course and served its purpose, we're going to let it go. And anything that you're attending that's outside of your direct responsibility that you attend just to be nice, we're going to let it go. And if you can already think of a meeting that's on your calendar that you're ready to let go, put let it go in the chat box and let me know if you've got some that you're going to let go. So once you've started to clear the decks and it feels really good, you're starting to make progress, you're starting to see that white space, we're going to take a look at the meetings that we've got some control over, and we're going to consider asynchronous meetings. So asynchronous communication. So this is any dialogue that takes place face-to-face or screen-to-screen, any dialogue that doesn't take place face-to-face or screen-to-screen, requiring an immediate response. Asynchronous communication. So that joke about how that meeting that could have been an email, this is exactly what asynchronous communication is for. I mean, how many of us have been in a meeting that could have been an email? Put email in the chat box and let me know, because I'm going to do it too, because that has happened way too often. This could have been an email, or this could have been a Slack chat, or this could have been something else. And so this is what we're going to look at. It are different ways. Yeah, this could have been a loom. Autumn, get excited. So we're going to talk about loom. That's exactly what we are going to talk about here. Are 3 really efficient methods for replacing a meeting with async communication. And those 3 are video, messaging, and forms. And I would love to know, 1 for video, 2 for messaging, 3 for forms. Are you using any of these methods currently to cut back on meetings? I would love to know. 1 for video, 2 for messaging, and 3 for forms. Okay, very cool. Love this. This is exciting. Okay, so let's take a look at each of these 3 options. First, video. We've got several of y'all have used video for async communication. So how exactly does this work? If you're not familiar with it, how exactly does this work? So let's say you're kicking off a project. So you could schedule a meeting with your team. You could hope that everyone shows up and pays attention, which sometimes paying attention is half the battle, right? You could schedule a meeting with your team. You could invite your team, hope that everybody shows up and pays attention. Then you could verbally share the details about the project, answer questions in the meeting, and then move on. Okay. But what if instead you recorded a video using Loom or any other type of video recording tool? What if instead you recorded a video with Loom sharing the same info you would have said in the meeting? You send that video to your team, they watch it at their convenience. And especially when you use Loom, you can see who has viewed the video. So the accountability factor is there. And then if they have any questions, comments, or feedback, they can comment right there below the video. So a friend of mine recently kicked off a project at her company, building a multi-channel editorial calendar for their marketing team. It was a pretty big undertaking because it involved different people, different stakeholders, different types of content, and they were building something that had never been in place before. So she considered scheduling a meeting to, like we just said, discuss the project, talk through it with the team, and get feedback. But instead, she recorded a Loom video. She explained the project, and she asked each team member to provide feedback by a specific deadline in order to keep the project moving forward. She asked each member of the team to share what type of content they contributed that needed a home on the content calendar and any other important details. They were able to move the project forward with no meeting, and they made big progress. It was an amazing use of everyone's time, and people were able to watch the video at their convenience. Some other examples of video messaging tools include and BombBomb. I've used Loom before, and I'd love to know, are there any others that I didn't include that would be really that you've maybe used before or that you've heard of for asynchronous communication using video? And if you don't have one that we've never heard of, which one do you like? Which one have you used before? Okay, yeah, Autumn has used Loom. Oh, I will have to check that out to see how that works in Slack. That gives me a new thing to experiment with. That's really fun. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Loom as well. Okay, so the second asynchronous communication method that you could use instead of meetings is messaging. And when I think messaging, I tend to think Slack. Okay, Asana uses Vimeo built in. That's really cool. Vidyard. Okay, I'm going to have to check that one out too. Awesome. Thank you. So, for example, messaging. If you use Slack, one way that you can use messaging instead of a meeting is to create a specific Slack channel just for your immediate team to drop in updates as needed. So for example, at Clockwise, we have a channel dedicated to the marketing team. I feel like this is a pretty common practice, but it's always helpful to revisit the basics. If you have an immediate team, create a Slack channel just for your immediate team so that you can drop things into the Slack chat as needed. This is something that can really cut back on time spent in those weekly check-ins, where instead of doing an exhaustive status update, it's really a quick catch-up. Or, so let's say you're leading an ad hoc project, such as a company rebrand, and or just something that, some other temporary project where you're working on it with a team for a short period of time. Consider creating a separate Slack channel just for the team members that are working on that project, cross-functional members that are working on that project, in order to share their thoughts and their feedback in one place. Another example, because these examples are what really get our wheels turning. So instead of a daily stand-up meeting and in Zoom, instead of a daily Zoom like stand-up meeting, you could have everyone drop their top priorities for the day into a shared Slack channel. So everyone has that visibility of what everyone's working on, but you didn't have to all gather and open up a Zoom meeting and spend time listening to what everyone has going on. And it keeps it short. And so whenever you create a separate Slack channel and you set expectations, because that's key, because you set expectations for the type of discussion that takes place within that channel, it can solve two big challenges. First, it lightens the load on your email inbox. I mean, couldn't we deal with less emails, right? I would, any opportunity to cut back on meetings and have less emails, I am for it. And the reason why that this helps cut back on email and lighten the inbox load is because there's no need to reply or reply all every time you want to share feedback or an update. It just lives in the Slack channel for you to scroll through and review. And if you would like less emails in your inbox, just put the word inbox and let me know that I'm not alone, because I would love to have less emails. And then second, it cuts down on meeting time. It's plain and simple. So instead of holding a meeting for everyone to share their feedback on the rebrand or whatever project, it just goes in the Slack channel. Instead of potentially extending your department check-in meeting, everybody's caught up ahead of time because of the Slack channel. And you can use your time for more important targeted items of business. All right. Third method of async communication to cut down on your meeting time: forms. And before you call the bureaucracy police on me, just stick with me. I want to tell you a story about one of my former time management clients named Liz. All right. So Liz was serving as the chief development officer for a nonprofit with an international impact. You've probably heard of it, and you've possibly even donated to it in the last few years. So anyway, Liz was drowning in meetings. 8 to 9 meetings a day, meetings with board members, meetings with donors, meetings with important stakeholders, and one-on-ones with her team. So many one-on-ones. And all too often, the one-on-ones didn't feel productive. I know, I see your face, Autumn. They were usually just a quick update that could have easily been an email, but her inbox was overflowing. But sometimes the thing is that even though like so many of those one-on-ones weren't productive, every once in a while, there would be one that was just like, wow, that was really important. And so it made it really difficult to know, okay, which one-on-ones do we keep, which do we cut? And so instead of slogging through a mountain of one-on-ones each week, just in case, Liz created what she called the 5x5 form. So what she did was she created a simple Google Doc template with 5 questions that should take about 5 minutes to answer each week. So each week, 5x5s were due from her team by a certain deadline. At that deadline, Liz would review each of the 5x5s, and then she'd take action. Some of her team members would get a quick email resolving a question or blasting through something that was blocking them, giving approval, giving permission, giving a next step. Some of her team would get a phone call, a quick phone call to verbally talk through something that took much less time than a one-on-one would have taken. And then some would get a meeting invitation. The ones that really rose to the top would get a meeting invitation. Liz finally found the breathing room that she so desperately needed. Her team still had a method of communicating with her, and she was in control of what type of interaction, of what type of one-on-one she had based on the level of importance. So out of curiosity, could you see yourself implementing something like Liz's 5x5? If so, just put the word form in the chat box and let me know. Yeah, so we've already covered the meeting audit. Yeah, so we've already covered the meeting audit, and we've talked about what to do if you find that you have too many one-on-ones. And I want to remind you that Clockwise actually has a one-on-one dashboard, so you can see all of your one-on-ones in one place. So that can be super helpful. But going back to Liz, so she used a Google Doc as her form, but she could have just as easily created a Google form to accomplish the same purpose. And then all of those responses would have gone into, a Google Sheet for her to review. So at Clockwise, we use a Slack app called Daily Bot that, Autumn, Asana forms are awesome too. They really are. I'm so glad that you added that one, because that one slipped my mind. That's a great example. We use Asana forms for design requests and other types of requests that really help us cut down on meetings and emails in the process. So at Clockwise, we use a Slack app called DailyBot that kind of combines the functionality of a form with messaging. So 2 different kinds of async in one, and it helps us cut some meetings, but it makes others, like our weekly business team stand up, just way more efficient. Okay, so we've talked about doing a meeting audit, and that led us to what we can cut or cancel. And then we looked at 3 options for asynchronous communication. Oh, and by the way, here is a great Clockwise blog post that is full of tips for implementing different types of asynchronous communication. So make sure you check that one out as well. So here's the thing. At this point, you've cut or canceled, you've looked at how you can implement async communication. At this point, you'll probably have some meetings on your calendar that you can't live without, that truly do help you move the needle. And fortunately, we've got a few options to craft shorter or less frequent meetings. But first, let me tell you about Parkinson's Law. And ones or twos, we're going to play ones or twos. If you've heard of Parkinson's Law, put a 1 in the chat box. And if you've never heard of Parkinson's Law, put a 2 in the chat box. Okay, so we've got some 2s. This is all right. This is good. You're going to love this. Parkinson's Law can be such a game changer once you know it and you know how to use it. So here we go. Parkinson's Law states that work expands to fill the time available, or work expands to fill the time allotted. Basically the same thing. Okay, this is jogging your memory, Autumn. I see that. Work expands to fill the time available. So Parkinson's Law shows up all over the place. If you move into a bigger apartment, all of a sudden your stuff somehow seems to expand to fill the space. If you move into an apartment with a bigger closet and you're like, oh, there's so much room in my closet, before you know it, your closet's bursting at the seams because somehow your clothes just expanded. I don't know how it happens, but it just seems to happen. Work expands to fill the time allotted, and Parkinson's Law definitely applies to our time in meetings too. So when you put a meeting on the calendar for 30 minutes, typically you'll find 30 minutes worth of stuff to talk about. When you put a meeting on the calendar for 15, it's the same thing. Okay, so now I'm not suggesting that you just go start slashing all of your meetings down to 15 minutes. While that sounds very fun, it's probably not an appropriate one-size-fits-all kind of response. Instead, I would challenge you to dial at least one of your meetings back just a bit. Instead of a 30-minute one-on-one, see if you can make it 25. Instead of an hour-long team meeting, see if you can knock it out in 45. Call it an experiment. See if you can make it happen. So this accomplishes a few things. First, it requires you to be more efficient in meetings. In our last office hours, we talked about how to be more efficient, how to be more effective and more engaging in meetings. And if you missed that one, you can catch the full replay over on our YouTube channel. But it requires you to be more efficient in meetings. Yes, it does. So this would be something great to experiment with, is to experiment with speedy meetings. But it's important to as you are shortening meetings, it makes you be more mindful to cover the most important items of business. This is one of those things where when you shorten it, the cream has to rise to the top. You've got to tackle the most important things first. And whenever you have shorter meetings, it's also incentive for members of your team to show up on time and get down to business, because they know that there's not just going to be this unlimited amount of time for them to pop in and join at their leisure. So shorter meetings helps you be more efficient. And second, if you put those now shortened meetings on autopilot in Clockwise, those extra minutes saved come back to you in the form of more focus time. And I'm sure that we could all benefit from just a little bit more focus time. I know I could. All right. So the last spend less time in meetings tip today is to take those meetings that have to happen, but see if they can happen less frequently. Do you really need a weekly one-on-one with that member of your team? Could it be every other week instead, with async communication in between? Because we're all pros on async communication now. Could you cut your daily morning stand-up meeting down to a weekly kickoff and a weekly wrap-up with async communication in between? How can you combine the different strategies we've talked about to create more space in your calendar? Could you use a form to turn a daily meeting into a weekly meeting? And then could you shorten that weekly meeting by 5 minutes? I encourage you to do that meeting audit and then get creative with opportunities to cut or cancel, to use asynchronous communication, and to craft shorter and less frequent meetings in order to spend time on what matters most. All right. With the time that we have remaining, I'm going to open it up for questions, and I'm heading up to the Q&A section to see what questions that we've got. Okay, here we go. First, okay, what are the top 3 things we need to stop or start doing after this session? So if you mean the top 3 things that we need to stop or start doing in order to spend less time in meetings, great question. Okay, so if I could offer 3 things, first, I would encourage you to start looking at meeting invitations with a very critical eye. Always asking yourself the question, what is my purpose in this meeting? Or how do I add value to this meeting? So like, what is my purpose? And then what is the purpose of this meeting? What is the purpose of this meeting? I can't tell you how many time management coaching clients I've worked with in the past who are accepting meeting invitations without knowing the purpose of the meeting. What are the decision points? Why am I in the meeting? And far too often they arrive to the meeting and then realize that it was not a good use of their time. So I would say the top 3 things to stop and start doing, I would say stop automatically accepting a meeting just because you've been invited to it, and start asking yourself, what is the purpose of the meeting? Bonus points, what are the decision points in this meeting? And third would be, what is my purpose in this meeting? Because when you know the answer to those questions, you're making a very, very informed decision about how you're spending your time. Okay, next up, I've been reading about this question's from Edna. I've been reading questions about time management based on one's energy level during the day. How could you apply that to work environments with predefined working hours, seen more as possible meeting hours? Okay, Edna, this is a really great question. Our energy levels play such an important role in our productivity during the day. Whenever you know what your biological peak time is, that time of day that you have the most natural energy, whenever you pair your most important work and do that most important work during that biological peak time, that has the potential to like double, triple your productivity because you are doing your best work while you're at your best. How could you apply that to work environments with predefined working hours? So here's how you could do it. So first of all, know your biological peak time. Know whenever you have that highest energy peak of the day. I can tell you that for most people, it's mornings. Most people are morning to mid-morning people, and in the afternoon, that 2:55 time frame, 2:55 is the time of day that most workers are at their lowest energy point. Whether you're a morning person or you're an evening person, a morning lark or a night owl, 2:55, that afternoon slump, is a slump for all of us. So knowing that, what kinds of activities can you try and schedule in that afternoon slump, because you're not going to be at your best. I can tell you that meetings are actually really good during that afternoon slump because they do require you to be engaged. And brainstorming sessions are also a really productive use of that afternoon slump time. And so any way that you can, any meetings that you have control over, so that you are putting that focus time kind of during your biological peak time, that can help you work within those predefined working hours and still take advantage of that biological peak time. So let me know if that was helpful, because that would be my top advice. Know your biological peak time and try and put your focus time to align with that biological peak time. How to propose and establish meeting audits in teams if you are not the team leader. Oh, that is such a fantastic question. So one thing that I would offer here is that you take the first step and be the leader. You have an opportunity to kind of lead by example here, and on your own, you can do your meeting audit. You could let your supervisor know, you could let your team know casually, yeah, I'm doing a meeting audit this week. I want to get an understanding of where my time is going. I think this is going to be really great heading into the new year, and to really talk it up and what the benefits are going to be. And then, share what you've learned, because a lot of times whenever people feel like you're onto something, or that you've unlocked a secret, that you've found something that can help them, they want to know about it too. And so I would say, do your meeting audit, tell others that you're doing a meeting audit, tell others about the benefits that you feel after doing it, and then just gently encourage others to try it out. You could even share that blog post that I shared a little bit earlier in the chat with the link to the Clockwise blog post that gives that breakdown of how to do a meeting audit. Okay. How do you effectively identify what is a good replacement for a meeting? Okay, another really fantastic question. So I think where the best place to start here would be going back to getting really clear on the purpose of the meeting. Why is this meeting taking place? Is the meeting for the team to provide status updates? Seems like a form or a message in a Slack channel could probably handle that. Is the purpose of the meeting to share feedback on like an ongoing project? That sounds like a form, again, could be a good fit. Kicking off a new project where you have like the one-way communication to the rest of your team, that could be a video. It's one of those things where it's always going to be a little bit of trial and error. We almost have to think about ourselves as scientists in a way, because we have to experiment and try new things and see what works and how it works with our team, and to be prepared to try something if what you tried at first doesn't work the first time. So that would be my recommendation to effectively identify that good replacement, is to first make sure that you're crystal clear on what the purpose of the meeting that you're replacing is, and then finding the asynchronous channel that matches up. Okay. Next question, what tactics can we use to avoid other people taking our recently opened spaces in our calendar to put more meetings? and also promote these 3 steps for our coworkers? Okay, great question. So this is where time blocking can really come into play. So let's say that you have done your meeting audit and you are beginning to create open space in your calendar. So one thing that you can do is for those remaining meetings, like your one-on-ones, your team check-ins, whatever you're able to put on autopilot within Clockwise, put those on autopilot, because whenever Clockwise runs and it creates your focus time, it will shift those open spaces into focus time. But in order to really protect that time, one thing that you could do is set a meeting with yourself using time blocking. So this is something that I do on a regular basis when I need to really protect that time, is creating an appointment on my calendar with a specific purpose, knowing how I want to use that time block and titling it creating office hours deck. I'll put that on my calendar so that no one can schedule over that. So that is one thing that you can do, is to put those time blocks on your calendar. And then to promote these 3 steps, cut and cancel, asynchronous communication, and then shorten or decrease the frequency. For that, you can, I would encourage you to just, share what you've learned today and share how it benefits you. People are always so excited to hear stories of success, just stories of how things work. So any opportunity that you have to say, I've really gotten my time back because I did a calendar audit and cut some of my meetings. Leading by example really makes a huge difference. Autumn's question: what were the 5 questions on the 5x5 form? I would love to try this out. I could probably find those questions. I don't remember what they were offhand, but it had to do with, what are you working on? I want to say it was, what are you working on this week? What did you accomplish last week? What is standing in your way? What obstacles are in your way? And then 2 others that were specific to their role on the development team. So I would say start with those 3 and then maybe add 2, or maybe you only need those 3. So, okay, here we go. I'm checking the chat now. Will Clockwise shift a hold for a workout, for example, to optimize your calendar? Okay, Jamie, this is a really great question. And I want to say that, yes, that you can put that on your calendar as a kind of like lunch. Offhand, I don't, yes, exactly. Yeah, Katie, thank you so much for jumping in. I'm so excited that you were here for that. Yes, you can mark it as flexible with autopilot. So you treat it almost like it's a meeting. It's a meeting with yourself. You mark it as flexible. You can set the parameters for when you want it to take place. And so it will be flexible, just like a lunch. And so, yes, Jamie, I would love to know if you tried that and how that worked for you. So make sure and shoot me an email. Let me know how that worked for you, because I think it's awesome that you are finding a way to use Clockwise to help make sure that you're getting in and being active during the day. Okay. Yeah, it can be really, really great to do that for walk breaks and for other things. And for other things like that, that you want to be able to shift around. Okay, so we are coming up on time. We have had some amazing questions. I want to run through some action items real quick because, I'm a coach. I want to make sure that we're taking action. So I would encourage you to first tweet, share on social media your biggest takeaway from today with the hashtag Clockwise Office Hours. I would love to see it. I also challenge you to take action on at least one thing that you've learned today, whether that's doing a meeting audit or finding new ways to incorporate asynchronous communication. And then finally, I encourage you to go ahead and register for our next Clockwise Office Hours. And the next Clockwise Office Hours will be taking place on December 8th. at 11 Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern. And I'll be talking about 3 ways to beat burnout. So unfortunately, burnout is surprisingly common, and maybe that doesn't come as a surprise to you at all. 77% of US professionals have experienced burnout in their current job, and that doesn't even count the times that they felt burnout in previous jobs. So burnout's tough on our people, it's tough on us, it's tough on our teams. It's an expensive problem, and it takes us away from what matters most. So next week, or in 2 weeks at office hours, I'll be sharing 3 ways that you can help your team navigate burnout or prevent it altogether. I would love to see you there. And you should be able to go to getclockwise.com/office hours to register. And thank you again so much for joining me today. If you are celebrating the Thanksgiving holiday in the States, I wish you happy holidays, and I hope that you have a great week wherever you are, whatever you have going on this week, and look forward to talking with you soon. You guys are amazing, and I really hope that as a result, you will be spending less time in meetings and more time on what matters most. All right. Thank you so much.